Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and since it came up in last week's video, I figured we may as well talk about Jim Lee's C-23 #1. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in April of 1998, before we get any further, I want to apologize to everybody who's watching this video. If you watched last week's video and some other videos whose numbers I can't remember at this point, I have been consistently spreading misinformation and disinformation, proclaiming that there were in fact only 6 issues of Jim Lee's C-23. In fact, there are 8 issues. I just learned that this week when I was doing a little bit of research for this episode that I'm recording right now. I cannot believe that I was this wrong for this long. I've owned these books for like 20 years at this point, and for the entirety of that time, I thought I had the entire series, all 6 issues. Turns out I could not have been more wrong, as there are 2 other issues that I never knew existed. I'm here to set the record straight. I do not want to be someone who is spreading fake news, as it were. I want everyone to know 6 issues is wrong, 8 issues is right. That is the number of issues of C-23. Now, the upside to this is that there are 2 issues of this book I've never read, and I'm looking forward to potentially reading those, assuming I can track them down, and seeing what else happened in this story past the 6 issues that I've read. The downside is I've looked like a buffoon for years as I've been telling people that there were only 6 issues of this book, not just on these videos, but in my private life as well. I apologize to everyone for getting that wrong. I'll try to do better in the future. And I'd also like to point out, if at any point I make some kind of glaring mistake like that in one of these videos, and you know for a fact that I'm wrong, point it out in the comments below. I am not at all above being criticized for being wrong. And if I am wrong, and you show me that I'm wrong, that's cool. I would rather learn from my mistakes and correct them than go on being wrong for the rest of my life. As we look here at the cover, I'm a little bit perplexed by this one. The artwork is actually really nice. I like it a lot, but the layout seems confusing and, I don't know, poorly planned. There's just something about this layout for the front cover that seems to me to be very just ramshackle in a way, and to be, somewhat confusing to people who are picking up this issue #1 with no real prior knowledge to these characters or this story, and you just have this kind of outer space background going on with some ships, some mechanical skull looking face here, people wearing high-tech exosuits, some guy down here in the bottom with a long beard, and none of this really matters to you because you don't know who any of these characters are at this point. And it just seems to me like they would have been better off just focusing on Corbin, who is this character here. He's also the main character of the story, in the front and center to kind of show, hey, this is who our story revolves around. You're going to find out more about him on the inside, rather than just dump all of these extra characters and extra backgrounds onto here that just feel like they're, nonsensical in a way because you don't know what any of it is or what it's referencing. Cover by Travis Charest. Editor, Rachel Brisden. C-23 created by Jim Lee, Brandon Choi, and Wizards of the Coast. Story, Brandon Choi and Jeff Mariota. Script, Jeff Mariota. Pencils, Alexander Lozano. Inks, John Nyberg. Computer colors, Wildstorms, Joel Benjamin, Alejandro Carbonero, Mike Garcia, and Tony Washington. Letters, Amy Garner. We see here on the inside of the front cover a rundown of 6 of the main characters of the story with a few paragraphs explaining their backstories. I'm not really a huge fan of the way this was done. I understand the necessity for it in terms of making sure that this comic book came out alongside of the collectible card game that it was supposed to be promoting. Those of you who don't know, the whole reason that this book exists is that it was supposed to coincide and promote a collectible card game of the same name. Unfortunately, the collectible card game was a commercial failure, And as a result, the comic book was canceled because its reason for existing was now gone. This is sad because the comic book's actually not that bad, and I actually am really into the story, but unfortunately, they didn't see it as being financially viable to keep this comic book going once the card game flopped, so we were stuck with only getting 8, not 6, issues. We see here the main character front and center. This is Corbin. He is the leader of the Hypershock troops. 2 of the troops under his command are in fact Phalanx and Nemesis. They are being directed by this man, Cronus, who we are not certain what his motives truly are right now. He seems to be working toward his own ends and is merely using the Hypershock troops to advance his ends. Whether or not that's good for them is irrelevant to him. We then get Hemlock, who is Cronus's right-hand man and the former leader of the Hypershock troops, and Medicus, who is the chief science and medical officer, whose job it is to maintain the health and operation of the individual Hypershock troops. Keep in mind, this is an important story point. Not just the Hypershock troops themselves, but basically everybody who exists in this entire comic book world is in fact a cyborg. This is something that was necessary to keep humanity going after what is referred to as the Great Cataclysm. But none of that is really explained in any depth in this actual issue. It's just kind of hinted at throughout all these paragraphs. Again, I don't like the way this was done, as yes, it's a good way of getting a lot of information out to you right off the bat. Unfortunately, it's done in the most, unappealing way possible in terms of it relating to a comic book, which is by default a visual medium, not so much a literary medium. Finally, getting into the story, we are first greeted by this lush green landscape with what looks to be like ancient Greek or Roman architecture. This is a haven known as Winter's End that is a colony of the Angellan people. The Angellans are the main adversaries of the colonists. The colonists, of course, are made up of the 6 main characters that I've talked about right here. And we're not exactly sure why the colonists and the Angellans are at war with each other, but it's been going on for decades, if not centuries at this point. And the Angellans who are in this colony, this haven as they call it, seem to be very happy and frolicking, enjoying themselves. And why wouldn't they be? It's a beautiful landscape. But then we see this figure moving through a lush forest as he continues to do something that we're not sure exactly what it is, as the narration talks about how this haven exists as a beautiful place of light that is a beacon for the Angellan people in these dark ages. Unfortunately, these dark ages are going to be illuminated in a way that none of them could foresee. We then get a big 2-page splash as the haven known as Winter's End is struck by a powerful weapon used by the colonist known as Dante's Hammer, which completely obliterates all of the landscape, just laying waste to everything, ripping up all of the trees by their roots, pillars of fire coming down from the sky, and this depiction of a large Grim Reaper type character. I don't know if this is just a metaphor or a visual metaphor to explain the pure destruction that this weapon is causing, or if he's actually there in the scene, visible to anyone who may have noticed this attack. It's not really explained. It looks super cool, I'll give him that. This is a really awesome 2-page splash, but it's not really that explanatory about why this big giant Grim Reaper is in the background. We are then teleported to a desert landscape that is half a day's march away from Winter's End. We then are greeted by the entire populace of Winter's End, and the Angellan people who lived there were warned that this attack was going to happen. Therefore, they gathered up all that they could and got out of the settlement before the damage was done, saving their own lives and also saving a precious cargo within this royal coach. However, they're starting to kind of wonder exactly who it was that warned them as they hear the blast that took out their former home, and believe now that maybe this was not a good thing that happened, them being warned like this, and that perhaps they may be getting set up. We then get an advertisement for 1080 snowboarding on the N64. I personally was never really that big a fan of this game. It's not that it's necessarily bad, it's just that it was marketed as a really cool snowboarding game where you would potentially be doing things something akin to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, which by the way did not exist when 1080 snowboarding was released. And it would be more about competing and doing cool snowboarding tricks and that sort of thing. And while the game does involve snowboarding tricks, it's in the context of it being a racing game, which it was never actually marketed as throughout all of its commercials and magazine ads, as we're seeing right here. So it was really kind of jarring to play it for the first time and realize that, oh no, this is a racing game where you're racing on snowboards and doing tricks as you're racing down a mountain, not like a cool, competitive snowboarding game. And again, it's not that the game is necessarily bad, it just wasn't what I was looking for, and that was why I really didn't like it that much. We then get an advertisement for Batman the Animated Series, which would then be syndicated onto Cartoon Network. This, of course, would have been the first time that it was featured on anything other than the Fox network. And I will say the same thing I said in last week's video. If you've never watched Batman the Animated Series, do so. Stop waiting to do that. It's a fantastic series. You will not be disappointed. If you like comic books and comic book mediums, go watch Batman the Animated Series, as it is the gold standard for superhero animated series. Getting back into the story, we see that the jig is up as the Angelans look up at the cliffs above them and realize that they have in fact been set up, and there is an ambush being sprung by the colonists. They immediately generate these completely nonsensical looking weapons in their hands out of pure energy. I don't know exactly what these are or how they're supposed to function, but apparently this is what the Angelans use to fight. They immediately start to take the fight to the colonists, and the colonists, while having the drop on them, are vastly outnumbered, and the battle is not going to be easily won. We then see the Hypershock troops immediately open fire as the battle is underway. Nemesis calls out to Helix, which is Corbin's code name, and states that Cronus was correct, that they were exactly where they were supposed to be, and that they do in fact have the royal cargo that they believed was within the Winter's End Haven, and this is their opportunity to capture the royal cargo. Corbin responds by stating Cronus is always right, which is a thing that he hates with anyone, especially a politician, and then corrects Nemesis stating, "Call me Corbin, I hate all this codename crap. What's your real name, Nemesis?" Nemesis responds by stating she can't remember it and that Nemesis will do. Corbin concedes and states, "All right, fine, I'll call you that." And then Phalanx interjects stating, "Did Corbin also tell you that we were going to be outnumbered 3-1? Corbin tells him no, that's not what they were expecting, but it's better odds than they're usually up against, as he grabs an injured comrade and then continues to open fire, but then realizes something does seem fishy about all of this as he yells out for all of his forces to fall back. Phalanx immediately questions exactly what's going on, and Corbin tells him it's just a hunch. He then calls to a very heavily armored and armed and super cybernetically modified individual known as Barrage and tells him to take aim at the large covered wagons that are in the caravan and blow them up. Barrage immediately does this and unleashes a massive amount of missiles that blow the wagons sky high and kill all of the occupants inside. Corbin realizes then that these wagons were in fact filled with enemy soldiers and that the Angelans were trying to draw them in so that they could surround them. Nemesis is shocked and asks how exactly he knew that was the case, and Corbin states that he doesn't know and perhaps it was just a lucky guess. He then instructs Barrage and another heavily armored and cybernetically modified individual known as Panzer to move in and fire at will. The two soldiers immediately respond by saying for the colony, as they seem to be very happy to oblige this order and unleash all of their destructive payload on their enemy. With their counteroffensive foiled and the elements of surprise on the side of the colonists, the Angellans are quickly defeated and forced to surrender. After the battle, Corbin decides that he's going to take a peek inside of the royal carriage. Nemesis questions if this is a wise move, but he states, hey, when else am I ever going to have this opportunity? As he opens up the carriage, he is greeted by a pupae that is surrounded by royal jelly. He reaches out and gets some of the royal jelly on his fingertips and brings it up to his nose, stating that it smells familiar, but he can't figure out why. Nemesis questions if this is a wise move, as they don't know what the jelly is or what it might possibly do, and Corbin concedes as he flicks it off his fingertips and states, let's get back to the colony with this prize. Meanwhile, back at the colony, we are brought into the conversation between Cronus and Hemlock. Hemlock is rather confused as Cronus states that he wants to declare it a holiday that celebrates the victory of Corbin and the Hypershock troops. He then states that he wants to sing the praises of Corbin and make sure that everyone knows what an amazing victory this was for the colony, but that he, in fact, will be the one delivering all the speeches, as we see the large, intricate gate of the colony opening up to allow the Hypershock troops back into the city along with their precious cargo. We then get a 2-page ad for Batman and Robin on the PlayStation. This game, unfortunately, is rather terrible. And it really just comes down to the team who created this game being way too ambitious and vastly exceeding the limitations of the technology that they were using at the time. This was supposed to be a large-scale, open-world crime-fighting game, and unfortunately, trying to accomplish that on the PS1 was never really going to happen. Had they waited one console generation and done this on the PlayStation 2, they could have pulled it off. That machine had more than enough power to do exactly what they were trying to do, as we saw with games like Spider-Man 2 that was on the PS2, that did all of the things that Batman and Robin was supposed to be. Unfortunately, this game had to come out exactly when it did because it was supposed to tie in with the Batman and Robin movie. And it's just one of those what could have been type of stories where they were just too ambitious for the time period to be able to achieve the goals that they had set for themselves. Back to the story, Hemlock questions the wisdom of making Corbin out to be the hero of the day, as he tells Cronus that he should be the one who receives all of these accolades, and that the populace should know that he's the one who devised the plan to get the Angellans to evacuate their haven, and that he's also the one who destroyed Winter's End with Dante's hammer. He then tells Cronus that if he were to in fact make out Corbin to be the hero, that it undermines his own position as benefactor of the colony. However, Cronus dismisses this, stating that everyone knows that Corbin and the Hypershock troops follow his orders, and that it was him who would have devised all of the planning around this day's events, and that despite Corbin being made out to be the hero of the mission, that they will ultimately know that Cronus is the one who was the hero of the colony. Finally, Hemlock concedes and states that he'll go along with the plan, but he does not trust Corbin in the least and will be keeping a very close eye on him. As we see the Hypershock troops make their way through the crowd, surrounded by thousands of people who are all singing their praises, we see a shadowy figure by the name of Giannis appear in a darkened alleyway as he gets the attention of Panzer. Panzer states that he's busy and he doesn't have time. However, Giannis hands him whatever this world's form of currency is and states, I'm going to make this worth your while. We then get a big 2-page ad for Crimson. Now, as of recording this video, I unfortunately only have like 2 random issues of Crimson, but I'm trying to hunt down the entire series because it is one of the very few series that was published under the Cliffhanger imprint. And while it didn't last long, I do find it to be a rather interesting series, and I'd like to make videos about it. However, I'd like to have all of the issues before I start doing that. So stay tuned, because hopefully one day I will have all of Crimson and can begin making an entire series about it. Giannis then asks Panzer exactly what was inside the royal carriage. However, Panzer is reluctant to give up this information, as he states Corbin was very adamant that no one else should be told. However, Giannis lets him know that the money he just handed him was equal to 2 months of his normal wages. That makes Panzer a little bit more cooperative, and he basically just flat out gives up the information, stating that it was an Angellan royal pupae and royal gel, and that's all he knows, and he then returns to the parade. Upon hearing this, Giannis is quite happy, as he states that a character we have not met yet, named Phyla, will pay handsomely for this knowledge, and Hemlock will pay even more to know that Phyla knows of this. Thanks, Panzer. Getting back to the parade, we see that the Hypershock troops are just being showered with praise and accolades, as thousands of citizens are overjoyed at the success of their mission. However, one person in particular is not, that person being Hemlock. Hemlock is also regarded as a hero in the colony, as he was the one who led a mission against one of the other havens, the original haven of the Angellan people, and was able to fight his way through that haven and also capture a member of the Angellan royal family. Unfortunately, that came at the cost of his own body, as he was horribly wounded during the mission and almost died being returned to the colony. Once back at the colony, the damage was so severe that they basically had to replace his entire body with machines, which are now the only thing keeping him alive, and his brain is essentially the only part of his original body left. Also, after this happened, he was in no condition to physically leave the colony and join the Hypershock troops anymore on their missions, so he was then replaced by Corbin. This has led to him being quite resentful of the Hypershock troops and of Corbin, and he plans on getting his revenge in one way or another. Later that evening at a banquet, we see Corbin and Nemesis making their way through a crowd of people, as Corbin leans over and asks Nemesis if she's enjoying this at all. She states no, and he says, "All right, cool. I'm going to go talk to Medicus, and then we can get out of here." As he approaches Medicus, Medicus is overjoyed, singing his praises, telling him what a good job he's done. And Cronus says, it's just part of my job. It's nothing that special. But Medicus doesn't let up. He states, no, you've done a great job. And it's been a while since I've seen you. You're supposed to be coming in for regular checkups so I can make sure that your cybernetics are all operational and functioning correctly, and to make sure that your health is, tip-top shape as Cronus wants. We then see Corbin begin to relent, as he states, yes, I owe Cronus a lot, my life in fact, and maybe I'll stop by tomorrow. He then explains that he has actually been feeling kind of strange ever since he touched the royal gel, and this catches Medicus's attention. Medicus then asks, you touched it? And Corbin states, yes, I did. Why? Is that a bad thing? Does it have some sort of disease? Am I going to die? And Medicus states, oh no, I'm certain it's nothing like that. I'm just kind of surprised. I've never known anyone who's handled it directly. But I'm going to test it out nonetheless to make sure that there are no contagions or toxins inside of it. And you just go about your business. I'm sure everything will be fine. But if these symptoms persist, feel free to stop by my office later this week and I'll give you a full once-over. Corbin thanks him as he meets back up with Nemesis, and the two of them apparently go back to his quarters and just sleep together. This is kind of strange given the fact that it seems as though they just met today, or at least have only met in the last few days, as, they don't seem to know each other at all. And Corbin states that she's very beautiful and that he hates to call her Nemesis. But Nemesis responds stating that I had to put away my true name because it hurts too badly to hear it. Corbin asks, well, what could be so bad that it would cause such feelings? Nemesis then goes on to explain that she was a very lucky little girl and that she had loving parents and 3 siblings and that they were a very happy family. But this story is going to take a very dark turn very quickly. Nemesis then goes on to explain that 10 years ago, in the year 2270, she was out on a picnic with her family, that they had strayed too far from the colony apparently, but they had found a source of clean, fresh water, which is incredibly rare in this world. They decided to have a picnic, and that she had been swimming in the water all day, that her family just couldn't get her out of it, as she had never experienced such a thing, and she was having the time of her life. Unfortunately, while the rest of her family was eating lunch, they were discovered by a contingent of Angellans who slaughtered all of them. Nemesis hid in the water, unable to do anything as she was only 10 years old, and she unfortunately had to witness the death of her entire family. She stayed in the water until the Angellans left and swore that one day she would get revenge, that she would do everything in her power to become a hypershock troop so that she could kill as many Angellans as possible. She then stated that now, as an adult, she is a member of the Hypershock troops and that she's living her dream, having joined up to enact the justice that she wanted to. She then asked Corbin, "So what about you? What led you to become a Hypershock troop?" And Corbin states that Cronus and Hemlock groomed him from the time he was a child and that he never realized he even had a choice in the matter. We then get a big advertisement for the touring schedule of everyone at Wildstorm and Cliffhanger and Homage, and of course, I had forgotten this was about the time that Danger Girl was releasing and getting really popular. And I gotta level with everybody. I do not own a single issue of Danger Girl, nor have I ever read a single issue of Danger Girl. This is not because I have a problem with that comic book. I have no opinion about it. It was just something that never really caught my interest and was sort of off my radar at the time. And I've never really had an opportunity to buy any issues of it. Now, that being said, if I ever come across a pretty complete collection of it, I'm going to buy all of it just so I can have it, read it myself, and start to make videos of it for the channel. We also find out, or at least I'm finding out, that there was a Gen 13 Fairchild bronze coin that was sold at some of these events. I've never seen one of these, but I'd be real intrigued to buy one if I ever came across one at a store somewhere or a convention, because despite the fact that this is just like a little type of like throwaway collectible, essentially, it's one of those cool, like off the beaten path collectibles that's really unique that I find very interesting. These are the kind of collectibles I like to get my hands on just because they are just so mysterious, at least to me, because they weren't something that was available to just anyone and everyone. You had to go to like specific events to get your hands on these things, and I've always found them really intriguing. We then get an advertisement for the C-23 collectible card game from Jim Lee, Wizards of the Coast, and Arc System. I didn't realize Arc System worked on this. Again, the card game was a massive failure, and I have never actually come across any of these cards or met anyone who actually played the game. If you, in fact, played this game at any point, please talk about it in the comments below, because I'd like to know more about the game. Was it any good? Was it just a victim of trying to launch at the same time that, you know, Magic the Gathering and Pokemon were just lighting the world on fire and just kind of got lost in the shuffle? No pun intended. But whatever information you have about this card game that you can give me, please, by all means, put it in the comments section down below, because I'd like to know more. Back to the story, we find out that Nemesis is kind of shocked to hear Corbin say this, and she says, "Corbin, all we have in this world are our choices, and I couldn't go on if I didn't believe that." Corbin is surprised to hear her say this and gives her a hug and a kiss as she leaves his quarters, stating, "Thank you, Nemesis. I've had a wonderful evening, and I really enjoyed your company." As she leaves, he then pulls off a piece of his cybernetics and states, "I won't be needing this until morning, so I may as well let it charge overnight," as we see him connect it into a piece of equipment along the wall. We are then teleported to a nefarious-looking laboratory as a man sitting in a chair states, "Oh, Corbin, good. You're finally recharging. You are a few days overdue for a memory adjustment, and we can't have that. That won't do at all." As we're not entirely, maybe this is Medicus, but it doesn't really look like him. This could be a completely unique character, but the way that he's depicted in this scene, it's kind of difficult to tell as we reach the end of this issue. We then get to a 2-page short story called Changing of the Guard by Jeff Mariota. Now, this short story, I believe, is taking place in the past and is trying to give an explanation as to what the cataclysm which caused the end of the world was, quote unquote end of the world. Obviously, there's still people alive. It follows the afternoon of a young man named Carson and his girlfriend Nicole as they move through the streets of some sort of a colony that they live in. I don't know if it's this exact same colony that's depicted in this issue. And as they're moving through, he's upset about basically his mom being angry that he's been skipping his history class and failed his exam because he never took it. And he doesn't believe that learning about history has any relevance. However, he and his girlfriend are confronted by an old beggar who lives in an alleyway who tells them that history is the most important thing because if you don't study history, you're doomed to repeat it. Now, how much of that is relevant to the story, I'm not certain. What does seem more relevant is that as they're moving through the colony, Corbin makes note of news reports that are happening that talk of volcanoes all across the world that are erupting spontaneously and in congruence with one another. Right now, it started in Europe, but has made its way over to South America. And it seems to be something that the entirety of the colony is watching with bated breath. And he believes that this is nothing that's all that important and that all these people are wasting their time being glued to the news feed. But it seems as though that this might be kind of a background way of explaining, hey, this is how everyone, was subjected to having to become a cyborg to survive. And, this is what caused the downfall of previous civilizations. Again, it's not explicitly stated that that's the case, but it does seem to be what Jeff is leaning into in this story. On the reverse inside cover, we then get an advertisement for DV8 number 18. As I'm recording this video, I think I have like maybe 3 or 4 issues of DV8, and I am trying to find all of the series so that I can make videos about it. Stay tuned. Hopefully in the future, one day I will be able to acquire all these issues and can start making videos about DV8 as well, as I'm trying to, hopefully get all of the different Wildstorm / homage / cliffhanger properties and be able to make full series about all of them on this channel. And that was C-23 number 1. Overall, I love this comic book. The artwork is serviceable. It's not anything that's lighting the world on fire, but it's decent. But the story is super intriguing, and I find it to be very unique, very interesting. I really like the world building that happened in this first issue. And while I do feel like giving that character rundown at the beginning was a little heavy-handed in trying to quick explain all of these characters and what their motivations were, whereas it would have been better to have that as a slow burn throughout the series, I understand why they did it given the card game tie-in. The short story at the end of the book was a little bit surprising. However, it is something that I feel fits with the tone of the book, especially at the very end of that short story, where it states that the main character of it, Carson, as he leaves the colony to go outside and find some fresh air with his girlfriend because it's so stuffy and polluted feeling inside of the colony, he can't forget the words that the old beggar woman in the alleyway said to him. And he believes that she may be right, that whatever is happening today might be completely different tomorrow and things may never be the same. Again, it's kind of one of those not super obvious but ominous warnings as to what was about to happen, which leads me to believe that the volcanic eruptions that were happening across the globe at that time were happening in the past, and that is what led to the quote-unquote great cataclysm that led to the world being as it is in the current day of C-23. I just am a little disappointed that the story didn't go on longer than it did so we could get more of it. However, these are just my opinions. You may have thought that C-23 was boring and that, the story wasn't anything that special, and that the short story at the end was just completely unnecessary for getting us to where we were in the present. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.